Greetings. Today I'd like to do a first look at the new Shure Axient Digital AD600 Spectrum Manager. This is a replacement for the prior Spectrum Manager, the AXT600, which was originally released 10-ish years ago for the Axient analog line of wireless equipment, and the AXT600 has been updated to support newer platforms like the Axient Digital and so forth. But it appears that with all the supply chain delays and whatnot, that Shure took the time or the opportunity to refresh the Spectrum Manager, bring it up to, current standards, if you will, and optimize it around the newer platforms, hence the AD600. I actually had my AXT600 order placed almost a year ago. In fact, we're 6 days short of when I placed the order a year. And they have converted all AXT600 orders into the AC version, AC powered version of the AD600. If you placed an order and you haven't gotten it yet and you want the new DC variant that they've introduced with the AD600, then you should contact your dealer ASAP and have them convert that to the AD600, which will be a small upcharge. I don't know exactly how much. For my purposes, the AC version is what I need, so I haven't investigated that. The AD600 has a few new things. It scans a lot faster. It also has multiple antenna inputs so that you can have your UHF band, a VHF band. So if they're supporting VHF ULXD equipment, for example, and who knows what other bands, it sort of suggests that maybe Shure will be coming out with some additional frequency ranges for some of their gear. But again, that's just speculation on my part. I have no particular insider knowledge. The 8600 comes in pretty standard cardboard packaging that's in line with all the rest of Shure stuff. If we put this open, we have an instruction manual. We have I think it's 3-foot shielded Cat. Don't know if it's Cat 5e or Cat 6. We have a little USB extension cable. So that's another thing that the AD600 adds, is it's got a USB port on the back, and you can do things like load and save scans and so forth to it. The AXT600, the older AXT600 did not do that. Comes with a short, if you're connecting, a bunch of Shure gear together in a rack, so you can daisy chain the power. This is what I'll be using. Comes with a full-length power cable. I think these are 6 feet or something, 5 or 6 feet. And also you'll notice that the ones they give you are locking connectors. So that's kind of nice. And then let's see, we've got a little baggie with rack screws and so forth. And then the star of the show, AD600 itself. Give me a moment to actually Let me get this out of the bag so I can put the, well, now it's double bag. So there's a plastic bag, protect it from moisture and such in shipping. And then another separate layer, not really a bag, but protective for scratches and so forth. So here we go. So I'm going to set this down for a moment while I get this box out of the way. So start with the back. Channel Patrick from Serve the Home, resting it on my shoulder. So on the back, you can see here are power inlet, power daisy chain. That's why I wanted the AC version, is because I'm going to be daisy chaining this in the rack. Then you have the Ethernet ports, right? So, and you'll note that it says Dante, right? And if you're familiar with other Shure equipment in the AD range, this port configuration will look very familiar, right? Why does this have Dante? Well, when we get to the front, it's got a headphone jack on it, and you can do Dante browse, so you can listen in on any Dante channel on your network, which admittedly all the AD receivers do the same thing. So do you really need it on this? Whatever, but it's there, right? Um, then here you've got, sorry, you've got that USB port that I was talking about. And then, as I said, you've got 6 antenna ports where you can run these either as 6 individual antennas, or you can do it as 3 pairs of 2, if I remember correctly from the docs. And so you could have, here's your first 2 might be UHF range, then you might have VHF, and then, maybe ISM 900 or whatever on third, right? So you can have antennas optimized for each of those. You'll note that there is no cascade output. This needs to be at the end of the chain, or as in my case, it's going to be connected to the cascade out ports on the antenna distro that I have in the rig. We flip this around to the front. I will not peel the plastic off at the moment because I'll wait until I get into the rack for that. So over here, like I say, you've got that headphone jack and volume for it and whatnot, right? You got nice big, I believe it's OLED display for the screen, whereas the AXT600 had 2 small LCDs side by side that were, this is color as well. And then obviously you've got controls and so forth over here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the recording and I'm going to get it loaded up into the rack, and then we will first off take a look at it in the rack, and then we will take a look at it through Wireless Workbench. One of the things that they've done with the AD600 is they've tried to make it such that it can really be Wireless Workbench on the go, that you don't actually have to use Wireless Workbench to do complex coordinations anymore. In addition to it serving the Spectrum Manager job that the AXT600 did, which is, monitoring the quality of your backup channels and being able to serve out channels when one of them takes an interference hit or whatever and it needs to swap over. All right. Well, at any rate, I'll be back in a little bit, and for you, it'll be now. Okay, so now we are looking at the front of the rig. Once again, top unit is a AXT 630 antenna distribution. It is set to wideband, which is the 470 to 698. And that's because the Axient itself can do 470 up to 613-ish or so, right? And I have the AD600 turned off at the moment because I figured let you guys see the little dance it does while it's booting up. It does take it a fair amount of time to boot up. It's not instantaneous, which you can see as it's blinking around here, right? And then got an AD4Q receiver here and space for a couple more receivers. As I said before, when we were looking at the back, a Cedar DNS 8D. And then these are the two switches for Dante primary, Dante secondary. And the Dante primary has that sub switch connected to it as well, where all the control networks stuff is, right? And so, um, zoom in a little bit here. One of the things that's kind of nice that USB extension cable that they gave you, or they give you, can actually be and normally, Shure has these little round cutouts so you can have the antennas poke through. In this case, they made the cutout just shaped exactly for that USB extender, and they give you the screws to screw it in place, and then a blank over on this side. The cable won't actually reach all the way to that side, but I suppose if you got a longer cable, you could do that. Um, as I said, you've got headphone, and if you click on the headphone dial, it brings up headphone settings and then the ability to do Dante browse, right? And the Dante browse then lets you search for Dante devices. It's taking its own sweet time. And so here you can see all of the different Dante devices, and then we could limit it to just Shure devices, right? Or display all again. And then you can click on one of them and listen to it, right? And I'll exit out of that. So this is the main screen. It's not got anything configured in regards to frequency analysis or anything yet. You can see it's quite responsive with the way things are jumping around a little bit right now. We'll get into the antenna menu in a moment, but it is configured for 470 through 700 megahertz. Um, and even though you can't legally use the 600 range here in the States anymore, because the wideband setting of the antenna distributor is the filter is allowing 470 698. I figured it made sense to be able to see what was going on up here because again, stuff that's leaking through may end up, you know, being able to, cause interference with your signal, right? So being able to see what's actually being let through by the filter makes sense because it's connected to the cascade port. I could actually like do the whole range of these antennas, which is up to what 1060 or something like that. But since the filter is going to knock that down anyway, I don't really see a lot of point in doing that. So right now, there's a couple of, as you can see the cursor moving around at the top, right? And so we can turn off the max, which is like the max seen across all of the various antennas that are enabled, or we can turn antenna B off, or we can turn antenna A off, right? So you can select what you want to see, by antenna very specifically, right? Scan tools. So I'm clicking on the control knob, brings up this, and now you can cursor around, you can capture, you can listen. So the listen, if you've got an audio source out there that's, somebody's analog transmitter or whatever, you can try to figure out what's out there and maybe go tap somebody on a shoulder to say, "Hey, can you turn that off?" Right? But um, you can also drop your own markers and so forth. And I won't go too much further with that. So the main menu, right? So the main first thing is you got frequency list monitor. Now this is empty at the moment because we haven't done a frequency coordination. We'll come back to that. And I'm going to skip frequency coordination for a moment because let's go through the other ones real quick, right? Event log shows you all the events that have occurred. So if you get interference or when it updates a channel or whatever, they all shows up in here. You can see the history of that. Device configuration. So the device ID lets you name the device. So that's how it shows up in things like wireless workbench. So this is call wireless rack uh, spectrum manager. Unfortunately, they only give you 8 characters. I wish they gave you more than that. Network settings lets you view and set all of the network ports. So that's the control port, Dante primary, Dante secondary, as well as the mode, whether it's switched or split redundant. I happen to have it set that because this rig is designed to be taken to jobs, everything in the rack has a static IP so that it can just fire up and everything that can talk to everything and don't need a router to do DHCP or anything like that. And antennas. So here, one, you can see it's set to mode paired. That's the way it came by default. So you got 3 sets, right? And now if you click on one of them, now you can enable or disable the pair. They have some presets, right? I changed the preset to, like I say, to be the 470 to 698. The preset was doing 470 to 1000, for example. And then bias. I don't need this to send and bias power because it's connected to the antenna distributor, and the antenna distributor obviously does not need bias power. And then for the second and third antenna sets, I disabled them because I don't have anything connected to them. You can also it'll read out, if you do have bias turned on, it'll read out how much power is being drawn on each antenna. And then also you got the total over here, right? Date and time lets you set the date and time of the device because, like I say, with the USB, if you're saving out logs or if you're saving out scan files or whatever, it lets them have an accurate time. One thing that would be nice is, these devices have network connectivity. So it'd be nice if there was a button on the side there that said, get time from NTP so that you could actually have something that's fairly accurate. I don't know how reliable the clock is in this and how much it's going to drift over time, right? With NTP, you wouldn't care. Then you have network browser, and again, this is doing that same thing. It's showing, well, this is just showing you Shure devices, right? And it also shows you things like, hey, there's the AXT630, and here's the one of the chargers I have, and you can hit firmware version, and it'll tell you what all is out there, right? Locks, so you can lock the front panel, you can lock the power switch, you can do access control, which has to be enabled through wireless workbench. You can factory reset, you can adjust display settings for brightness and sleep. And then fans, probably never going to take it off of auto unless you need it to be really quiet somewhere. And then about tells you, the firmware and so forth, right? And on display, we can set display sleep maximum is 60 seconds. That's you'd want it to be more like, I don't know, at least an hour, maybe 2 hours. When you're doing a gig, you don't necessarily want it turning off during the gig and then having to keep tapping it to wake it up, right? So, although I presume if there's an event like a interference event or something like that, then it'll wake up on its own. But so let's exit out of device settings. Headphones is the same menu as when you press the headphone dial in itself. So let's go to frequency coordination. And in here you have simple mode and advanced mode. And I'm going to do advanced mode because here in Chicago, channels 14 and 15 are public safety. You get in real trouble if you use those, right? So we don't want it to do that. But I'm not going to necessarily do like the full TV coordination like you might do with wireless workbench because, it's able to scan the spectrum real quick and also it'll create backup frequencies and you can shift around. So we'll let it do its thing, but we want to make sure that it avoids the public safety channels, right? So I'm going to do create new advanced. And the way this works is you'll see it's got next down here. You can do next and previous, right? So this first, and over here, it's like, what step are you on? So the first step is what devices do we want to control? So defaults to selecting all devices that it found. So in this case, it's the one AD4Q, right? So we'll hit next. And now it's asking about frequencies to generate, right? So we got 4 frequencies from the AD, right? And the backup, unfortunately, it defaults to 0. And I was hoping that 0 would mean that it would just like wireless workbench does. It tries to calculate as many as possible, and after it's done all your primary frequencies, right? Well, no, 0 literally means 0, right? So we'll spin this up, and the dial is, if you spin the dial real slow, you get 1 by 1, and if you know, give it a good ring, then it actually jumps numbers quite a bit, right? So you can actually get to any number you want pretty quickly. So I'll say next. And now it's asking us about, we're going to do our scan and what settings. And this is also where we would apply our exclusions, right? So we're going to click the settings button here. Scans, we could load scans off of the USB drive, which don't have that. Threshold is, what's your minimum thresholds, right? Fairly standard settings there. TV channels. Now, the thing right now is it's not aware of what TV channel mode, right? So is it 6 megahertz channels? Is it 8 megahertz channels, right? So the first thing we have to do is click TV format and then click this to highlight. And now we can scroll through these things, right? So you got 8, 7, 6 megahertz Japan and 6 megahertz everywhere else. And you'll note the enter button is blinking. Click the enter button and it says saved. And now it basically has created a list of all the frequencies or the TV channels. And we could do select all or deselect all if we've selected all, right? But what we want, as I said, we want to exclude 14 and 15, right? And I'll hit enter. And so now I exit that. If we look in the exclusion list, you can see it's actually added those channels as exclusions, the ranges for those channels. And then we could also manually add, so a single channel or a range here. So like if there was some, so you've been told, hey, camera hops or in-ears, IEMs, etc., are going to be on some ranges. You want to avoid them. You could add manual exclusions here, but we're not going to do that. So I'm going to exit. So now our exclusions are done. So I've exited, and now I can click Start Scan. And I can one of the big things with the AD600 is like scans are just like poof, right? That was what, a couple of seconds for that to come up. Um, and it's actually continually updating right now until I click stop scan. And so you can see all the places where it says, hey, this is bad, including our manual exclusions, right? So now I'm going to hit next. And so here we could do some more advanced things. User groups, so like inclusion groups, I believe that is from the wireless workbench stuff. You can change the coordination order. So if you want to prioritize your PSM 1000 differently because than your AD, because the AD has a wider tuning range, right? The defaults should more or less be okay, but if you have special situations, you can do that. We're not going to change any of these. We're going to say next. And so now you'll note it says not started. It's found 0 of 24. And I can click start. And boom, just like that, it calculated, it found all 24. It's got a green ring. It's happy. So you can see it's got all, and then it's got also breakdowns by what ranges. So in my case, I've only got the one AD class here, but like actually, if I went in the other room and turned the old ULXD on and had it in here, it could also select frequencies for the ULXD. Now we're going to hit next. And now here's the review screen, and you got deploy here. So we're going to hit deploy. And when we do that, you'll note that the receiver is going to go blinkety blink. So deploy, well, actually it wants us to confirm first. So I'm going to hit enter, and now blinkety blink, and it has deployed everything. And now we're back. It automatically took us to that frequency list monitor page, which was the first item in the menus, if you might remember. You can see that we've got 4 deployed, 20 of the backup frequencies are ready, 0 of the backup frequencies are in a degraded state. And if we exit out now, back to the main menu, what you'll see is you've got the white lines for where it has deployed these frequencies, and you got the green lines for all the backup channels that it is monitoring and thinks is healthy. I'm going to guess that if a backup channel is not good, it'll show up as yellow or red. I haven't had a way to actually really test that. And then you can see, up here, there's a lot of activity in the cell phone range above 600 bouncing around, but the rest of this is kind of stable. And you'll note that because we had put those exclusions in for 14 and 15, it did not pick anything in the 14, 15 public safety channels. So I'm going to switch over to the computer next, and we will look at how this all shows up in Wireless Workbench. Okay, so now we are looking at the computer, and we have Wireless Workbench up, and we also have Dante Controller up. And I've renamed AD600 as it shows up in Dante Controller. And here you can see it's got the receive, listen, not currently joined to anything. It does actually show 2 transmit channels, but I haven't figured out what would send to those, if anything. The RX listen, I tried, but unfortunately I didn't stumble across anything that was actually decodable. So I have all my packs set to encrypted mode, and so the RX listen, or the drop-in listen on the AD600, it doesn't know what to do or can't decrypt encrypted belt packs because obviously it doesn't know what the encryption key is, right? The interesting thing is it's a Brooklyn, so this is massive overkill for the number of channels. It does let you do the Dante redundancy, but they could have also done that with Broadway. My guess is that they chose to use Brooklyn because they're just standardized on their development platform that they have with a bunch of the other devices like the AD receivers and their ULX receivers and so forth. Latency, obviously, it's not receiving anything, so it doesn't say anything. Device config. You can do 48K or 96. Does not do pull up. And, you've got latency, and because it's Brooklyn, you can do whatever latency you want, but latency doesn't really matter when you're dealing with um, just drop-in listens on the network with the headphones on the AD600, right? Network config, as you can see, I've got it in switched mode. And then this is my separate VLAN for Dante primary. And then I'm not doing PDS, right? So that's just a quick overview of it in Dante. So if we go back to Wireless Workbench, and we can right click and do properties. And so here we can see, unfortunately, this window doesn't resize. So we can see the channels that are assigned. We can see the backup channels, and you got a couple of green, and you got a degraded red, and then yellows, greens, couple more degraded reds. And here, this edit, you could manually add or remove devices from the frequency list. Device list is showing what devices are connected to it, right? And again, I've only got the one antenna. This lets you edit all the stuff the same as you can do from the front panel, right? So you click edit. Now you can say enabled or disabled. You have presets. So if you say VHF or UHF, Japan, Europe licensed, full range is everything, right? And then you can apply and still disabled, but whatever. And then settings is like change the device ID, fan mode, and so forth, right? The more interesting thing is what happens when we want to do a frequency coordination, right? So I'm going to add the 4 frequencies from the body pack. And over here, I can do my scan sources, and I'm going to pick the spectrum manager, and I'm also going to pick the AD4Q itself, right? And now if you're familiar with Wireless Workbench, when it's doing a scan, the other thing I'll do is I'll say 470 to 620 for the range, right? So if you're familiar with Wireless Workbench, it's going to pull in the scan left to right, and you can see in the different colors the scan rate coming in, right? So if we say scan, boom, the AD600 is already done. And then here you can see this blue that's like creeping along, which is the AD4Q doing its scan. And then if I had the ULX turned on, it makes the AD look like the spectrum manager in terms of scan speed, right? Because the ULXD is a 10 or 12-year-old device original design at this point, right? So and it's also price tier down from the Axient digital. But we'll let this scan complete. Shouldn't take too much longer. While that's going, I will switch over to the spectrum, and I will do the same thing of select channels 14 and 15 to exclude, because those are public safety. So now you can see they're redded out over here on the left. And it should be done any moment now. Do. So yeah, you can really see the difference in performance with the AD600 scanning versus the more traditional way of letting your receivers do the scan. All right, so that scan now finally finished, right? So we can do calculate. And now, as I said before, wireless workbench, you've got the preferences setting to find backup channels automatically. It's basically just trying to find as many backup channels as can, right? We could stop it if we want. We'll let it run for a little bit more, see if it um, gives up on its own. But even still, we've got total of 58 channels that are going to be in the list, and it doesn't look like it's finding anything more. So I'm just going to hit stop. So we've got the 4 channels, and we've got another 54 backup channels. And so we can say assign and deploy. This window should look familiar. And what we can then do is say deploy all zones. And you'll see that it uploaded the CFL to the Spectrum Manager. And if we view the log, we can see it set the frequency on those channels and uploaded the CFL and verified that they're on the channels they're supposed to be and verified that the Spectrum Manager is configured and we're good, right? And so now the Spectrum Manager is tracking a whole bunch of channels. And then the other thing we can do is we can click on this frequency list. And this is talking to the Spectrum Manager. And you can see it's updating in real time, right? So here's our in-use channels. And then here's all those 50 some channels and what their state is: green, DVM reading, right? They're all ready. Yellow is, not fully degraded, but, not great either. And, this part here is all kind of standard wireless workbench stuff, right? Event log, you can see that it's sending stuff to the Spectrum Manager here. And I think that's probably good enough for now with what the experience is on the computer or with Dante and with Wireless Workbench.